It's great to be in the SEC. Thank you for listening to the SEC Recap Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Warren. If you love all things Southeastern Conference, the SEC Recap is where you want to be. Don't forget to like, subscribe, get notified for new episodes when they drop each week. This is week 3, recapping the action. I'm dubbing week 3 the weekend of redemptions and oopsies. Some teams had redemptions, others had oopsies. Don't forget, you can follow along to the companion article for this podcast. The link will be in the show notes. The SEC went 9-1 against non-conference foes in week 3, the only loss being to Auburn, falling to Penn State 41-12 in Jordan-Hare. In SEC play, Georgia went on the road to South Carolina and swallowed up the Cocks 48-7. And in our game of the week, LSU upset, at least I consider it an upset, the Mississippi State Bulldogs 31-16 in Baton Rouge. That means the SEC keeps 8 teams in the AP Top 25 for the second week in a row. And we're going to break it all down right here on the SEC Week 3 recap. First, let's check out the standings. In the East, Georgia stays at number 1. They get a conference win. They improve to 3-0 on the year. Number 2 in the East would be number 8 overall, Kentucky. They're now at 1-0 in the conference and 3-0 overall. And third in the East, number 11, Tennessee. No conference wins yet, but they are the last undefeated team at 3-0 in the East. Following that's going to be Vanderbilt at 3-1, Missouri at 2-1, number 20, Florida. And the reason Florida's behind Missouri in the conference standings because they do have that conference loss to Kentucky. And they sit at 2-1 on the year. And rounding up the bottom is South Carolina, 0-2 in conference, 1-2 overall. Over in the West, number 10, Arkansas in the number 1 spot, 1-0 conference, 3-0 overall. LSU right behind them with the conference win over Mississippi State. They're at 2-1 on the year. At third, number 2, Alabama, followed by number 16, Ole Miss, and then Auburn, Mississippi State, and number 23, Texas A&M. Before we go on, this is a little bit longer episode. There's going to be more to cover, so I'm probably going to break this one into 2 episodes. We'll cover the East, and then tomorrow I'll put out my coverage of the SEC West, but I'll go ahead and include the updated power rankings since I've already posted those on Twitter. And then tomorrow I'll cover the West and we'll look at our week 4 preview. So let's hit the huddle.
Come on, huddle up.
In the East, Georgia. This game played out exactly like I thought it would. I was never on the South Carolina hype train. They went in and upset Georgia once back in 2019, and every year we've had to listen to them say they're going to do it again. Look, not only is UGA playing like the number 1 team in the country, but South Carolina has been playing like a last place team in the SEC East. Georgia's offense did whatever they wanted to against South Carolina's defense, and Georgia's defense just did Georgia defense things. This was a blowout. Kentucky. I think this game started pretty quietly against an FCS team in Youngstown State. They had a couple sacks on Levis in the first quarter, or at least the first half, and Levis ultimately ended up throwing 2 interceptions in this game. I mean, color me skeptical, but I'm just not buying UK as a top 10 team. Yeah, they won 31-0. They're still undefeated, and they have a conference win over Florida, but I still see a lot of issues with this offense, lack of a run game being the primary one. And I'm not exactly expecting Chris Rodriguez to walk back in after 5 weeks and be instantly amazing in SEC play. I don't care. You can hate on me all you want. I'm just not buying Kentucky stock as a top 10 team. Top 20, maybe even top 15, absolutely. Top 10, not for me. Tennessee. All right, I'm going to talk a little bit more about this Tennessee game. This was kind of a dirty game. The Vols kicked Akron's teeth in 62-6, but what did they ultimately get out of this game? This was a game that replaced the Army game that UT had been trying to buy their way out of for, a few years now. A lot of people unhappy that they bought out the Army game, and especially when you replaced it with a game like Akron. This was one going into it. They really just wanted to get in, get your 2s and 3s, some quality reps, and then get out of this game without any injuries. And that did not happen. Cedric Tillman went down. Jabari Small went down. Dylan Sampson had to come out of the game. We saw Tyler Barron go down somewhere in the, not sure if it was the second or third quarter, but this game was pretty ugly overall. And I know officiating is a really tough job, and I don't believe there's an officiating crew in the country that wants to get it wrong or has a strong inherent bias. But I never got the sense throughout this game that the officials were ever really in control. Akron was playing really dirty. It was really chippy. They were jawing the entire game. They were putting dirty hits on our players. They were going for players' knees. If you haven't watched any of the film, don't just take my word for it. Go back and watch some of it. They were laying dirty hits on Hendon Hooker and a number of other players, chop blocking at the knees. They were jawing, not just at us, but at refs. They were crying. The quarterback, DJ Irons, man, it was just, I would say it was funny, but it wasn't funny. Every time the camera was on him, he was just running his mouth at either an official or us and then taunting and cheering. And I couldn't believe that they never flagged any of them for unsportsmanlike conduct. Who did get flagged for unsportsmanlike conduct was the Vols, unfortunately. But there was just a lot of things in that game. There a lot of contact plays, some offensive pass interference calls, a couple on Brew McCoy, which I think in SEC play, that's contact that they're just going to let go. For whatever reason, the refs' flags were flying in this game, and I think a lot of those calls were questionable. Some of them you go back and look at, and it makes a ton of sense. They're trying to do things by the book, but it just blew my mind that we saw, I don't know, at least half a dozen unsportsmanlikes against Tennessee players. And, every time I saw the cameras, it was just Akron players running their mouth, jawing at the refs, jawing at the Vols sideline, jawing at our players. So it is what it is. The last thing we'll say on this, I'm sure everybody's seen it by now, but the Jimmy Callaway punches, look, I'm not going to defend what he did ever. It's indefensible. You shouldn't ever swing punches on the field. But I think this is a product of how this game was happening. The fact that the refs were never in control of this game. I think when you got late into the third quarter, fourth quarter, and Vols players had been putting up with this Akron trash talk and these unflagged, unsportsmanlike conduct plays, it just reaches a boiling point. And I feel like if the refs had this under control at any point up to the third quarter, then this may not have happened. Again, that's not an excuse for what Jimmy Callaway did. I'm not defending it. But I think it's a product of how the refs kind of let all of this spiral out of control throughout the game. If you go back and look at the film, even the announcers on the call, Aaron Murray was one of them, caught this. The Akron defender, number 28 or 29, I can't remember what his number was exactly, but he actually kind of took the first swipe. I don't know if it was as much of a punch as it was kind of a swipe or a slap to the face and helmet of Jimmy Callaway. And then he kind of grabbed his face mask. And it's at that point that everybody saw Jimmy Callaway start to throw those punches. And he threw like 5 or 6 blows to his helmet. First of all, how stupid do you have to be to throw barehanded punches at somebody wearing a helmet? I mean, come on, man. You've just got to keep that emotion under control. They were playing dirty the whole game, but you were the one who got caught responding to it. I don't know what's going to happen to Jimmy Callaway. It was right that he got ejected. I don't expect he'll play next weekend, especially not versus Florida, but I know the coaching staff was not happy with him. And I'll just say that I don't think what he did was indicative or representative of the other players that were on that field. You didn't see anybody else come to blows, even though there was a lot of trash talk and a lot of chippiness. So enough of that. Look, the Vols defense is much improved from last year. They're getting after quarterbacks. They're pressuring quarterbacks. And I think that should scare anyone on UT's schedule. And I'm looking at you, Florida Gators, coming up this weekend. All right, moving on. Vanderbilt. Hey, I was pretty confident Vandy would pick up the road win, and they did. So kudos to the Commodores. But now they start SEC play, and they're going on the road to Bama and then Georgia. So as good as A.J. Swan was, he had 4 TDs against Northern Illinois. Hope it was fun while it lasted. I'm not sure they'll win an SEC game other than an outside chance against South Carolina or Missouri. Speaking of Missouri, this was kind of a redemption game. A little bit. And I think what defines this game the most to me is punt returns. Luther Burden had 4 for 111 yards, including a long one for 78 and a touchdown. So a lot of things were better in this game for Mizzou, but they were held to just 3 points in the second and fourth quarters by Abilene Christian, to whom they also gave up over 309 yards of total offense. So credit to the Tigers for the win, but I have concerns for them in SEC play. They'll travel to Auburn this week. I just think they need to get more consistent in their offensive play. Florida Gators. Man, this one to me is an oopsie. The Gators are lucky they came out of this one with a win. One they largely owe to South Florida late game mishaps. They had an interception and a missed field goal. That kind of let Florida come back and hang on to this one. I said last week we could cool it with the Richardson for Heisman talk. This week he was 10 of 18 for 112 yards and 2 interceptions. No touchdowns. It's just bad. He had 7 rushes for 24 yards. He has no passing touchdowns on the year. No wide receiver for Florida in this game recorded more than 3 catches or 33 yards. I just don't think that's good enough to compete in the SEC, and they're rolling into Knoxville this week to face a red-hot Tennessee offense in Neyland Stadium. Neyland's going to be checkered out. Vols fans are going to be up and ready. College game day is going to be in town. I don't think Gators are ready for this first road test. That's just me. South Carolina, oof. This isn't even an oopsie. This is a toilet emoji. I'm going to talk about South Carolina a little more here too. Look, I get it. They played the number 1 team in the country and all that, blah, 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 blah. They looked no different in this game than they did the previous week versus Arkansas, who, by the way, almost lost to Missouri State. I mean, they just looked bad. South Carolina looks and plays like a bad football team. And I'm sorry, Gamecocks fans. I'm really, really sorry. But you need to have a come to Jesus moment about what's happening over there. I think it's time to transition away from the preseason hype and the Shane Beamer TikTok videos to the reality that you have yet to see a good football game from this team. And the schedule only gets tougher. And I'm not counting Georgia State in week 1 as a complete football game. If it weren't for 2 really spectacular special teams plays, that game might have gone the wrong way. All right, as I said, I'll cover the SEC West tomorrow, but I want to go ahead and do my power rankings. Like I said, I've already tweeted those out. So go check out my Twitter at SEC Recap. And I'm going to start from the bottom. So we just left South Carolina in the huddle, and that's exactly where I'm picking up in my power rankings. Coming in at number 14, South Carolina. Now listen, I'll explain myself, and I'm going to give you some stats here. Defensive injuries, offensive line problems, lack of a run game. I haven't seen any improvement from last year on either side of the ball. And I'm just thinking, if Vanderbilt and South Carolina or Missouri and South Carolina played tomorrow, who would you take? Vandy almost won last year, and Vandy's a better team this year. South Carolina isn't. In number 13, this is where I'm putting Missouri. Beating Abilene Christian isn't impressive, but Mizzou did show some promise offensively, and we got a glimpse, just a glimpse, of the identity that I think they want to establish. They still need to be cleaner on defense. They still need to be more consistent on offense. But I'm bumping Missouri up, bumping South Carolina down. Number 12, Vanderbilt. Are you surprised? Well, they're 3-1 on the season. I mean, I don't know how far they'll get in SEC play, but man, I think just enjoy where you're at for the moment. Now, why would I have South Carolina at 14, Missouri 13, Vanderbilt at 12? Well, here's some stats for you. First, let's look at South Carolina. Through 3 games this year, South Carolina has 72 points and 1,029 total offensive yards. Compare that to last year through 3 games. In 2021, they had 79 points and 1,068 total yards. So through 3 games this year, they have fewer points and fewer yards. Now, passing yards, they do have more passing yards. They have 818 on the year compared to 624 last year. But last year, they had 6 touchdowns off of those 624 passing yards. This year, off of 818 passing yards, just 3 touchdowns. The big difference is the run game. Last year, through 3 games, 444 yards. This year, through 3 games, 211 yards. It's just not good, man. Last year, they had 6 turnovers. 2 of those were interceptions. This year, 8 turnovers, 6 of which are interceptions. Look, we heard all offseason that Spencer Rattler was supposed to be the difference maker in this offense. It was the highest profile quarterback transfer portal pickup. I mean, where does this leave you? Is it just Spencer Rattler? I don't think so. I think there's a lot of problems on this team, and it's not just the players. I think it's the coaches on the sideline. Defensively, this year, they've given up 1,315 total yards. Compare that to 868 last year. The defense has only forced 1 turnover this year. If you want to compare that to Missouri, Missouri has 98 points from offense this year compared to 72 for South Carolina. Missouri has 1,269 total yards of offense. Compare that to just over 1,000 for South Carolina. Missouri has 7 turnovers, but only 5 of those are interceptions. And Missouri's offense has garnered 61 first downs. South Carolina, 59 first downs. Let's compare it to Vanderbilt. If you take any 3 of Vanderbilt's games, that means Vanderbilt's played 4 games. They played in week 0. Take any 3 of Vanderbilt's games, total up the yards. They have more total yards than South Carolina. Of any of those 3. You can drop the Hawaii game. They still have more total yards than South Carolina. If you take any 3 of Vanderbilt's games defensively, they've given up fewer yards than South Carolina. Vanderbilt has 1 interception on the year compared to South Carolina's 6. Vanderbilt's defense has forced 5 turnovers. compared to South Carolina's 1. So if, again, you want to wonder, well, why do you have South Carolina at 14, Missouri at 13, Vanderbilt 12? There's your answer. I think if Vanderbilt or Missouri played South Carolina tomorrow, they'd have a strong chance of winning those games. South Carolina's got a lot of problems, and I think a lot of it's on the coaching side. Shane Beamer looks and handles himself like a clown. I mean, I saw his post-game interview where the reporter asked him, was there any, he said something to the effect of, was there any give up in that locker room? And look, I get that you don't always want to answer those kinds of questions as a coach, but this has happened multiple times with Shane Beamer where he just kind of scoffs and rolls his eyes and looks indignant and he goes, what the hell kind of question is that? How could you ask me that? Now, maybe he's standing up for his players a little bit, but this isn't the only instance where he's done this, where he's made these faces and rolled his eyes and act like it's such a stupid question. Look, when you lose your media members, I mean, they control your narrative. This just comes with the territory of being a head coach. You have to answer questions you don't like. Don't pull the Jeremy Pruitt where you just start talking down to every reporter. I think Shane Beamer needs to start handling himself like a head coach and not just a special teams coach who got promoted. Again, Gamecocks fans, I'm sorry. I will show you some love this year, I promise. But I'm just not liking a whole lot of what I'm seeing in South Carolina right now. All right, back to the power rankings. Coming in at number 11, talk about another team with problems, Auburn. I mean, they've got quarterback issues. We'll talk about this more in the SEC West breakdown tomorrow. But man, they've got some stuff to get figured out there. Number 10, Texas A&M. I don't think Miami was a good team. I think they're an okay SEC team. A&M's going to have to wear the home loss to App State for the rest of the season. The Miami win doesn't just erase that. And until this offense can come up to par with the defense, this is a middle-of-the-pack SEC team. I've said it since week 1, this A&M defense is legit. They have the talent to be legit, but they need an offense that matches that. Until they can score, I mean, I just don't see them really competing with Alabama or, even Arkansas, and maybe not even LSU or hell, Ole Miss or Mississippi State. I mean, it's looking like, if it weren't for Auburn, Texas A&M might still be at the back of the SEC West, even with this Miami win. All right, Florida, number 9. I think the Gators fans know how lucky they got with this win. Gators have to figure out their offense. They have a lot of inexperience on both sides of the ball. Based on what I've seen, they look like a middle-of-the-road SEC team to me. And they're going to have a tough time in Knoxville this weekend if they can't figure a couple of those things out. Number 8, I'm dropping Mississippi State. I have to drop them following their first loss of the season. It wasn't a bad loss, but they really did give up a lot to that LSU team. So I'm moving LSU just ahead of them to number 7. To me, that's kind of a potential turnaround win for Brian Kelly over what I still think is a good Mississippi State team. The Mississippi State's offense, they figured out a way to slow it down and kind of halt that air raid ultimately in the fourth quarter. So congrats to the LSU Tigers. I think Mississippi State should have been ranked. So effectively, that is, a really solid win for LSU. At number 6, I'm bumping Arkansas down here. You can't almost lose to an FCS team and stay where you are in the rankings. I've got to drop them due to poor secondary play and an almost upset in the Bobby Petrino Bowl. Number 5, Kentucky. They got the win 31-0 over Youngstown State. I don't know what they really got out of this game. Kentucky still has no real run game. Defensively, they're good, but it's hard to be impressed by anything you see. This offensive line still gave up 2 sacks. Will Levis has been sacked 11 times in 3 games. just add that to the list of reasons why I'm not buying Kentucky top 10 stock long term. At number 4, I'm moving Ole Miss. Now, this move up for Ole Miss is as much due to Kentucky and Arkansas's more underwhelming performances as it is Ole Miss's blowout of Georgia Tech. This was not a good Georgia Tech team, but Ole Miss won in a blowout. So Rebels offense looks real good. Jackson Dart looks great. They have a chance to contend with the likes of Arkansas for that number 2 spot in the West. Overall, at number 3, Tennessee Volunteers. This defense is improved. They're getting after quarterbacks, and I'm just not sure how many defenses could legitimately stop this offense. I think there might be 1 or 2 in the country that could really slow it down, if not stop it, outside of like the Georgia and maybe a couple other elite defenses. I think most of these other teams are just going to have to try to keep up with the scoring that Tennessee's putting up. They just look red hot and unstoppable right now. Number 2, no surprise here, Alabama. I said this last week. I still think Alabama's looking uncharacteristically beatable, but until they are beat, they're going to stay at the number 2 spot, meaning still remaining at the overall number 1 ranking. Georgia, non-debatable. If you're going to put anybody other than Georgia, not just number 1 in the SEC, but number 1 overall, you need to have your eyes checked. All right, that's going to do it for today's show. Keep an ear out for the SEC West pod. That'll drop tomorrow. Again, follow on Twitter at SEC Recap. Like, share, subscribe, get notified for new episodes. Remember, you can support this podcast through the podcast homepage, anchor.fm/SEC Recap. Have a great day. Have a great week. And it's great to be in the SEC right here on the SEC Recap.